the millions, and we will be. Because it starts right here.
Guilty.
Welcome to Naptown People's Radio, a weekly podcast of the Indianapolis branch of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I'm your host, Dani Abdullah, and I'm here with my comrade and co-host,
Derek Ford.
We're here to guide you through the pressing issues facing Indianapolis from the perspective of the people, not the oppressors. And as organizers involved in these issues, we're not just talking about the news, we're making it happen. So this week, we're back to our regular programming, but we hope you enjoyed Dakota Fronter House's excellent presentation on the 59th anniversary of the Black Panther Party last week. And props to all of our supporters and listeners. And we encourage you to share the show with a friend or make a donation at support.naptownpeoplesradio.com. And we can put that in the show notes as well. So on today's episode, we're covering some developments with ICE and immigration, the ongoing horror show that is the Indianapolis Democratic Party, and we'll spend our segment providing some historical and other information necessary for understanding the recent call for a general strike. But before we get into that, we've got the Naptown Breakdown. What's on deck this week, Derek?
So first, I want to talk about ICE and immigration. Tom Homan, former acting director of ICE and the quote-unquote border czar for the Trump administration, was hosted at the State House by Todd Rokita and J.D. Prescott to push legislators to bring the, quote, Fairness Act, unquote, into fruition in the coming general session. This legislation would require local law enforcement to comply with detainer requests, extending the amount of time someone can be held so ICE can take them into custody. It would allow legal immunity for agencies that comply and punishment for agencies that don't. So this legislation appeared last year as House Bill 1531 and passed out of House but stalled in the Senate. Now, Todd Rokita fortunately suffered a loss this week when a St. Joseph County judge dismissed his lawsuit against Sheriff Bill Redman, the sheriff of St. Joseph County. Rokita filed the lawsuit earlier this year in January, claiming Redman was violating state law by implementing policies or practices prohibiting staff from cooperating with federal immigration officials when undocumented immigrants were arrested. We don't know whether Rokita will appeal or not, but this is a battle that won't be won only in the courts, and we can take a look at Chicago to see what I mean by that. Communities across Chicago have been mounting protests as ICE terrorizes retail stores, neighborhoods, and schools. What they call Operation Midway Blitz, a campaign launched by the Department of Homeland Security, resulting in over 1,500 arrests in the metropolitan area and multiple deaths, has been met with intense opposition. It's targeting, predominantly Latino neighborhoods, but the resistance that they've been met is not just by activists; it's by business owners refusing to serve ICE agents, refusing to let them use their bathrooms, citizens following them with their microphones and whistles, school teachers and staff escorting students to and from the building, letting them know that ICE is not welcome in Chicago. And that's really how it's done. So salute to the people of Chicago. And bringing it back to Indianapolis, though, on October 13th, Mirror Indy opened up yet another dam, exposing the wanton corruption of the Hogsett administration. And since then, the Democratic Party has taken on a more and more cultish vibe. Now, just to recap this for our listeners, right? In August 2024, over a year ago, undeniable evidence emerged that Hogsett fostered a misogynistic culture where sexual assault and abuse were tolerated, if not outright endorsed. This came after two brave women, Lauren Roberts and Caroline Ellert, came forward with their experiences of suffering under Hogsett's right-hand man, one Thomas Cook. In 2017, Cook's harassment and abuse of power over Lauren Roberts came to light, violating city codes against relationships between coworkers and the city's anti-fraternization policy. While the city's HR director recommended firing Cook, Hogsett kept him on board, working for the city before he resigned at the end of 2020. Yet the news release about Cook's departure didn't mention anything about this. It was just filled with praise about how he helped, quote, our city, quote, by raising $1 billion in development deals. Now, apparently those deals didn't stop flowing after his resignation because Indy Star investigation has found that Hogsett ignored conflicts of interest involving millions of dollars in city incentives. So after his resignation, Cook got a job with a law firm with close ties to Hogsett, and he proceeded to enlist developers that secured millions of dollars in city's incentives. The biggest beneficiary, Thomas Cook, the mayor's former chief of staff, who was forced to resign because of a prohibited relationship with a subordinate. But he's still cashing in with the full backing of Hogsett. So he signed up. So basically, the law firm, right, has strong ties to Hogsett, and he signed up for a roster of big-time developers and helped them secure millions of dollars in incentives like, COVID relief funds, tax breaks, easements. The city agency involved is led by Scarlett Andrews, who was sexually involved with Cook, and the reason he was kicked out of the mayor's office. So Andrews began leading the city's Department of Metropolitan Development in 2020, before serving as deputy mayor for economic development until the end of 2023. Those positions, enabled her to recommend people and developers for projects to receive our taxpayer dollars. Andrews awarded and recommended over $80 million in public incentives, or our money, in other words, to projects with ties to Cook's clients. She even threw her support behind developers who were facing widespread neighborhood opposition. Again, showing you exactly who these people are and what they represent and who they represent. Mirror Indy also reports that she gave luxury apartments the ability to get around affordable housing requirements in the city. Because if there's one thing we all know, it's that there's way too much affordable housing in the city. So, it's still a good old boys club, and Hogsett is still cashing in too. Hogsett raised campaign donations from Cook's clients. So on October 16th of this year, City County Councilor Michael Paul Hart, a Republican, became the 5th councilor to call for Hogsett's resignation. That's October 16th, 2025. Again, we knew about Hogsett's regime of abuse and corruption in August 2024. And immediately, Councilor Jesse Brown of DSA joined us in a press conference calling for Hogsett's resignation. Later, Democrats Krista Carlino and Andy Nielsen called for his resignation, as did Republican Josh Bain. Hogsett's henchman, voice of the predator, Bob Osley, said he wants to wait for more information before taking a stance. A cowardly excuse, right? He wanted more information before humiliating Krista Carlino when she called for Hogsett's resignation. And then he demanded a public apology from her and then stripped her of all power. And yet, basically another act of public misogyny. Again, there are 25 seats on the City County Council, and over a year on, only 5 have called for Hogsett's resignation, right? And all 25 aren't Democrats, right? This tells you something. Their system isn't broken. It's just embarrassed for now. I'm amazed it's weathering the storm, but I'm confident that the rank and file voting Democrats of this city are disgusted and will be very open to third-party candidates, ones who don't bow down to Hogsett or Osley, but stay true to their principles during the next election season. But we don't have to wait that long. Because change doesn't only happen through elections. It happens when people come together, unite, and take up public space. And that's what happened in 2 powerful displays this past week. The first was a truly inspiring protest against the proposed Metro Metablocks data center in the Martindale-Brightwood neighborhood, where we shut down the intersection of Sherman and 25th for over an hour. That was last Tuesday. Really incredible. Metro Blocks, too, you should look them up. They are basically a fraud company. They list 5 data centers on their website. Not a single one has been built. We'll put that in the show notes. And then on Saturday, thousands of people came out to protest the Trump administration's assault on workers. Signs at the protest highlighted a number of issues affecting us today. Attacks on immigrants, the global climate crisis, the gutting of essential social services. And we want to give a shout out to Stuart Mora, a former guest on this show and longtime organizer, for inviting us to table at the activist fair. Because a massive outpouring of outrage against the Trump administration is one step. But, what to do when the rally's over? How can we keep the energy, enthusiasm, righteous indignation, and collective desire to transform the world and the conditions we're forced to live under? That's exactly what the PSL is for and why we support the Liberation Center. And now finally, interestingly, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson made the call for a general strike. And now we hear calls for this quite often, and they don't happen, obviously, because you call for them. And there's a lot of work to be done, but we have a lot of history to draw on here in the U.S. to take up this call. And I believe, Dani, that's what the next segment will be on, correct?
Yes, that is correct. We will be getting into that.
All right. So that concludes it for this week's Naptown Breakdown.
And we will be right back.
Yeah. Recognize the revolution. Recognize the revolution. Recognize the revolution.
And we're back on Naptown People's Radio. This segment, we are going to be discussing the general strike, what it is, what it's looked like historically, what it might take for us to organize one today, the role that they play in social struggles, and more. And to do that, we're going to look at actual general strikes that have taken place in the U.S., and I believe in particular one in Seattle. Is that right, Dani?
Yeah. So I know for myself, when general strike was called, I was like, well, that has been called multiple times, right? Derek alluded to that. But in recent history, right, something on such a large scale we haven't been able to see, at least in the United States. But there is historical context for it. So to kind of give that to our listeners, gonna go back a little bit by about 100 years, a little over 100 years ago, right? Which is actually not that long ago. But anyway, so February 6th to 11th of 1919, the workers of Seattle, Washington, staged a general strike that disproved two foundational lies of capitalism. About to get into my Marxist bag, y'all. Okay, so two foundational lies of capitalism. One, we need the bourgeois, we need capitalists, right, to organize society for us. That is a lie. That is not true. The second one being that our suffering is not their doing, right? But the doing of other workers, of oppressed people in the U.S., outside of the U.S., minorities in general, right? These are lies. Hopefully, if you've made it this far in the podcast, you know that. But if not, surprise, that is a lie. That is not true. So the strike demanded, it had a few different demands, right? One was better pay, better working conditions, all the way to solidarity with the workers of Russia, right? And opposition to U.S. military intervention in the anti-Soviet civil war taking place there. Again, this is 1919. And if you grew up in this country like I did, information like that would be very surprising to hear, that in this country, there were people in Seattle, Washington, of all places, who were like, hey, yeah, we're not anti-communist, right? We are pro-worker. And so the workers not only struck against the factories, shipyards, docks, logging operations, but also undertook the direct management of civil affairs in the city, right? Operating food banks and soup kitchens, providing childcare and other social services, running their city, as they always were doing anyway, right? They were always running the city. They were always running, workers are always running this country. We don't need Hogsett. We don't need VOP to run our cities for us. We can actually do it ourselves. Now, this was over 100 years ago, right? 1919. But the workers' movement made strides in overcoming racist and nationalist divisions as they work toward like a multinational, international. Multinational is just like another word for like race doesn't actually matter, guys, right? You know, sometimes me and Derek bicker, not because Derek's white, but because Derek is Derek. Not because
because I'm right.
That's debatable. But but so although it took place 100 years ago, it still provides really great inspiration and fuel to our struggle today. Right. So the Seattle General Strike was the result of a pretty complex history of local economic development and political conflict, major organizing efforts by labor unions, and the particular historical conjecture of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and the effects of, you know, the American people, right? And the situation that the Americans that we found ourselves in, and that at that point, especially on the U.S. West Coast. So like just north of Seattle, workers in the city of Everett were on strike in the fall of 1916 as well. November 5th, the Verona steamship set out from Seattle with like 250 industrial workers of the world and militants to provide support for the Everett strikers. So when the ship got there, a mob of like vigilantes, gun-wielding vigilantes in particular, of local lawmen, cops, right? The real thugs, attacked them. Shocker. So 5 workers were killed and many more were wounded. And 2 of these like quote unquote deputies were also killed. Though the shots which felled, they came from the lawmen, right? They came from somewhere on shore. But afterwards, 74 workers were charged with murder, which was ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous, right? And the trial became a political struggle. And local juries acquitted all accused in the spring of 1917. And this victory is what fueled further militancy, inspiring a major strike in the logging camps with the leadership of the IWW. And in March 1918, the loggers won their demands, including an 8-hour day and improvements in working conditions. So the tide of class struggle was on the rise, right? Like it was already building up. So we have that happening. And then the political situation in Seattle was shaped, again, not just by like local conditions, but also what was happening around the world, right? The United States joined this imperialist conflict in World War I in April 1917. We have the Socialist Party, the IWW, and many other workers opposed to the U.S.'s involvement, rightfully so. There's millions of people dying around the world. Most of them workers, right? Actually, all of them, let's be honest. All of them workers, all of them poor people, because rich people are not sending their children to go die in wars. So all of them are workers dying in this war for rich people, right?
The spoils of the colonies.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Bolshevik Revolution broke out in November 1917. And this gave rise to a Red Scare, right, on the part of the American ruling class, which further tried to suppress internationalism, unions, workers, the people who were making the world run. And at the end of the war in Europe, this freed up American forces to be deployed in Russia because that's exactly what they should be doing, right?
They had to strangle the Bolshevik baby in its crib, as Winston Churchill said.
There it is, of course. What a great guy, Winston Churchill. And so they're sending American troops to Russia to, really even before Soviet Russia has actually even become a thing to, as Winston Churchill so eloquently put that, what a great guy, to strangle the revolution really before they even could walk, honestly. And and to restore capitalism, right? Because of its proximity to Asia, Seattle was the logical, quote unquote, port to use to ship men and materials to Russia. And by the winter of 1918 to 1919, the stage was really set for this radical confrontation. Now, just before this moment of like this international solidarity that we find that I've kind of preluded to, right, that takes place in Seattle, there was really like a sense of class consciousness, which is very similar to what we are experiencing now, right? The people of the United States are like, hey, what the hell is happening here? And really making these personal connections to larger global issues, just like they were doing in 1918, 1919. So this ship that goes, it's called the Sheikah. I might have mispronounced that. Derek's going to tell me if I did. He didn't say anything, so I didn't. Okay. Is like carrying cargo of like beans and peas. And when it entered the port for refueling, workers in Seattle and from Russia were able to meet face to face, right? And they're exchanging these experiences and these viewpoints, and they're realizing, oh, you are not my enemy, right? And they held this celebration and held a mass meeting in the IWW hall with a Soviet sailor as the guest of honor. And the visit of the Sheikah left a lasting sense of connection between the workers on both sides of the Pacific, which would, play a great role in this general strike that takes place. So the general strike evolved, again, out of this stoppage by 35,000 shipyard workers, which began on January 21st, 1919. So they appealed to the Central Labor Council for support. A general strike committee was formed, and a call was issued for the strike to begin on February 6th. So when that day come, over 100,000 workers joined the strike. Right? This is not a small feat, right? This is a lot of workers coming together, uniting. And I want to pay close attention to that because I'm sure 100,000 people all agreeing to do one thing. I'm sure there were differences of opinions. I'm sure there were those who felt like, oh, maybe we should go about it this way and that way. But the biggest thing that we should take from that is they were able to come together and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And even if there was a difference of opinion, coming together and able to like work together and not do a lot of the infighting that sometimes you can see that breaks up these what could be great moments. They didn't let that stop them, right?
Yeah. And I think, and it's just, you think about, okay, however many thousands of people were out in the streets of Saturday protesting, but it's one thing to get 100,000 people protesting. It's another to get 100,000 people striking.
Absolutely. Right. So the demands included, like I said, better pay conditions, but also opposition to the loading and shipping of war materials to fight the Soviets. Again, they've met these people face to face. These are people just like them, right? So not only dock workers and shipyard workers, but also loggers and workers from the city's trades joined in. So for the next week, the strikers essentially ran the city. So childcare, food services, patrolling the streets to maintain order, keeping supplies going to hospitals, carrying out political education programs. The Seattle General Strike was a laboratory in which the working class gained important experience in organizing and managing social affairs and understanding and learning, like, we can do this, right? You don't need a fancy degree to run your city. I'm saying that as somebody who has a master's degree, but like my husband did not go to college, and he's at home with my children right now, taking care of them, right? He could absolutely, my husband and my comrade is perfectly capable of helping to run this city, right? And so in this, it was a struggle that pushed for this multinational. Again, that's Asian people, that's white people, that's people of African descent, to work together, right? And have this class unity and push forward. While the IWW and the International Longshoremen's Association were open to workers of all nationalities, most trade unions in Seattle at the time excluded Japanese and Black workers. Yet, when the general strike erupted, both groups of workers joined the ranks of strikers, with Japanese labor associations formally endorsing the strike actions, right? Now, of course, the local and national bourgeoisie could not tolerate this kind of workers' movement. And so, of course, like municipal and state and federal authorities all mobilized to, attack the strikers as they do. Oftentimes you'll hear about these rallies or these protests and they're violent, and it's never the people who are trying to feed themselves and feed their neighbors or just trying to get a living wage. It is those who are trying to keep us oppressed, who are attacking, who are causing the violence. And that was the same for 1919. That was the same for 2020. That was, that is always the case. As my mother would say, right? Like, leopard doesn't change their stripes or their spots or whatever they got. I don't know what they got. Spots. They have spots. A zebra has stripes. Yeah. All right. But city government recruited these special constables, right? Which is just like an armed thug.
Yeah.
Right?
Drunks.
Yeah. Right. And they deployed them to intimidate the workers. So the federal government sent in troops as well. That should sound familiar. And even the national leadership of the American Federation of Labor failed to support the strikers, as they feared the radicalism of the workers in context of the repression of the Red Scare. So big media in those days, the national newspaper, acted as the voice of corporate interest and slandered the strikers as traitors and Bolsheviks. And the general strike had to yield to massive physical and political pressure. And by February 11th, the strike was, eventually it was called off, unfortunately. But like, they could have continued, right? Derek asked the question earlier of like, what do we do after the rally? What do we do, in between this No Kings rally and, the next one? Because people are still being kidnapped. People are still being gunned down in the streets. Hogsett is still allowing sexual predators to just, roam his administration. What do we do in between? And, these 1919 was 100 years ago. These are our ancestors at this point. But like, our ancestors showed us, right? Like, you come together and you can run this city just like they did, and it's not hard if we come together and we put petty differences to the side, in order to see like, what is the bigger picture here?
Mm. Yeah. And they did it in 1919. The other thing, of course, is like, it's not like they have social media. They're not texting each
Absolutely.
other. They're not like coordinating any of this online. They're not emailing each other like information, right? They're like copying it by hand.
Yeah.
They're delivering speeches. They're assembling in physical place. So those are things that are valuable and are necessary as we also utilize, contemporary tools of media.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And, 1919, that's a very important lesson. And we could also look to recently, there was, basically millions of people shut down Italy in a general strike for Gaza, right?
Yeah.
In solidarity with the flotilla. 2 million people taken to the streets Friday, October 3rd. And there were also like hundreds of thousands of more throughout Europe, Australia, Africa, South and North America, and Asia. And the general strike in Italy was a second called by Italian unions after a strike on September 22nd in response to the first Israeli attack on the flotilla, which is really an unprecedented display of solidarity for the people of Gaza. it's estimated that 60% of the population participated in the strike. In key sectors of the Italian economy, just like shuts down operations to demand an arms embargo and an immediate end to the genocide in Gaza. And that is, that's a different context, but it shows you again, like how much power we actually have because we are the workers. And what you said, Dani, earlier is really important because, we tend to think about a strike is like, it's within the capitalist framework, right? It's like, you're negotiating with your boss, right? Collective bargaining. And when you can't reach an agreement, there's a strike and it's a sacrifice and there's a strike fund, and you're prepared for it. But you're pretty sure it's going to end at some point, right?
Right.
But there's like picketing and whatnot. But that a general strike is different because it's when there's like a strike in one industry or sector extends to all others, right? When basically workers from all sectors that are concerned, take collective action, withhold their labor until their demands are met, and it escalates a pressure on a broader scale more than a strike in one place. It can take place throughout an industry or throughout a city, right, or a state or a national level. And as you said, like it exposes the fact that workers are the ones who run the world. And so we should be the ones who are in charge of running the world. And it shows that when we withhold our labor power, nothing proceeds, right?
Absolutely.
And then once a general strike happens, it raises a question, though, which is, well, if everything is shut down, who's going to care for the sick people? How do fires get put out? Who picks up the trash? How do we ensure people get food and basic services that our children are taken care of? So immediately, some production must resume, right? And vital services as well. But when that happens, it happens under the direction of the general strike, right? Which is kind of like a Soviet, basically, a council, communal council. The leadership body for the general strike says to different, sectors of the industry, like, all right, we're on strike, but you should go to work because, we should provide these general services and goods. And as soon as that happens, the power of the working class is shown to organize society itself.
Yeah.
Right? And not just in its capacity to withhold labor, but to actually resume and direct production and labor ourselves. And it shows instantly for everybody to see that the old ruling class managers are in fact totally unnecessary and they're just parasites. Really demonstrating in an embryonic form, but a very powerful way, what socialism is and could look like.
Absolutely. It's very, when learning about what happened in Seattle, another Marxist bag for me, made me think a lot about the Paris Commune, which we don't need to get into that because that's a whole other episode. But, it was essentially the same thing, right? The people were like, yeah, we're not doing this, and created their own government, took care of each other, made sure things were still getting done. Still, it wasn't like, it wasn't like anarchy.
Yeah, no.
Right. It was like, okay.
I thought you said you weren't going to cuss on here. Just kidding.
But it was still taking care of each other. It was like, children still have to be taken care of, right? Because parents still have to work at the hospital, right? These are things that still have to happen. These are things that still need to be taken care of. And people are not dumb, right? The people are not dumb and are very capable of taking care of these things, right? But it does have to be organized, right? There does have to be some group of people who is like, okay, yeah, this is what we're gonna do, and this is how we're gonna do it, and negotiating with the quote unquote boss, right? And what are the demands, right? Because there have to be demands, and trying to get those demands met is very important. But so I know that when that general strike, Brandon Johnson called out that general strike, a lot of people were like, yeah, what does that mean? Because it sounds nice. But if you don't know what that means and what does that look like and is that possible, that can be a little overwhelming, you know? And that was the purpose of this, was like, this is possible. Absolutely. If it's a general strike for the United States, that calls for us to be unified. And that calls for us to, regardless of what your individual wants are, it calls for you to, put that to the side a little bit at least. And okay, what is best for the people, you know? But I think, just like our ancestors in 1919 were in Seattle, we're getting it together. We're perfectly capable of doing this. And I think even more so because we are more connected internationally, right? We don't have to take a ship that takes X amount of weeks to meet a Russian person and realize, oh man, you're just like me, right? We have these nifty little things in our pockets, and we're able to do that. And also, just like compassion in general. But yeah, I believe in the people, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the other thing that, I wanted to point out, that as I was listening to you tell the story, I was like, yeah, it's interesting that the multinationalism, it's not like it came before. It's not like they were like, all right, everybody, let's get together and let's have this liberal sort of listening session and like overcome my internal racism and your internal racism and blah, 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 right? And then we can do it. No, it was through the act itself that they built unity. Because when you're side by side, shoulder to shoulder in the same struggle, you're like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, we do have more in common with each other than we do with the boss, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for that, Dani. It's really important for us to know, more about what a general strike entails. It seems daunting, and it is definitely a big task, but we've done it before, as you said. Our ancestors have. We'll learn from them, and we will do it again. And please stay with us for our Circle City shout out and upcoming actions after a short break.
What happened is that we responded. Where there is repression, there will be resistance.
And welcome back to Naptown People's Radio. Dani, who gets a Circle City shout out this week?
All right, so today's Circle City shout out goes to Eduardo Luna. So Eduardo is the founder of Arte Mexicano in Indiana and is also the co-creator of the Idol Jorg Museum's Dia de los Muertos community celebration. And so if you do not know, Arte Mexicano was the first affiliated group of the Indy Liberation Center when the Indy branch of the PSL, that's what Derek and I are part of, that branch, when we opened up our new Liberation Center back in 2023. So Eduardo is like OG comrade, OG like showing up, and we love Eduardo and the party, and everybody else should love Eduardo as well. But Eduardo created Arte Mexicano in Indiana back in 2020 after years of noticing the gap in Indiana for the representation of Mexican, Latino, and Hispanic art and culture in Indiana. Indiana, if you do not know, Indiana has such a large percentage of Latinos, and in particular, those with Mexican heritage. So, like a true leader that he is, Eduardo saw the need to create a space for his community. So because of Eduardo, Indianapolis now has a space to help lift up Mexican and Latino artists here in Indiana to be represented. So in addition to Arte Mexicano, as I said, Eduardo is also the co-creator of the Idol Jorg's Dia de los Muertos celebration. So for those who do not know, Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, is a tradition and a holiday that started in Mexico and is amazing and beautiful, and like, honestly, like look it up on YouTube if you don't know what it is. But I've said it on here before, but as someone who is, and I just said it, but like someone who's always trying to hype up my ancestors and always trying to make them proud, this is a holiday in particular that I love dearly, although it's not something of my cultural background. Dia de los Muertos is amazing. So this is not something that should be confused with Halloween, please, y'all. But this is a Mexican celebration that is thousands of years old. Although I do love a good Samhain celebration too. You know, no shade to Halloween. But on Saturday, October 25th, from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. at the Idol Jorg, if you do know about Dia de los Muertos, or if you don't, show up, learn about it, take part in it, be there to celebrate. You might see me there. My son, you might see me there. My son, he's been super into Dia de los Muertos ever since he found out that other people have ancestral altars in their house, not just us. So he's like, this is amazing. So we may be there. Eduardo has also been like very kind to the PSL lately, and has been letting us use his meeting space as we are transitioning to our new ILC, showing that he is a true member of our community. You know, he's a real comrade. So as I always say to listeners, you know, showing up for the community, being an organizer, an activist, you know, whatever, that looks different for everyone. You know, what does your calling look like? Where do you see the gaps in our community? Eduardo saw a gap and he filled it with art. He filled it with beauty. And that is an amazing thing, you know. So shout out to Eduardo.
Yeah. Yeah, and he also, with the Fonseca Du Bois Gallery at the Indianapolis Liberation Center, they started a new annual tradition 2 years ago, Free to Buy Colors, right? Angela Hampton was the first solo show, and then this one was a group show, and that's every July, and it's really incredible works of art inspired by communist Frida Kahlo. Just such a generous human being, and somebody who is just really willing to work through differences, right?
Yes.
Not set them aside,
sure.
work through them, right?
For sure.
Yeah. No, I love Eduardo. And between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m., you said?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Saturday
the 25th.
Yeah.
All right, great.
Are you going to show up? Am I going to see you?
I mean, if you're there, if I hear you're there, I'm coming. But that same day, I'm going to be at Luger Plaza between 1 and 3 p.m. with Hope Packages, doing their regular assembly and aid distribution. And I also wanted to call our listeners' attention to an event that's taking place at the People's Forum in New York City. So it's in person there. But I'm saying it because our comrade Shaka A. Shakur is going to be one of the panelists. It is called The Carceral Republics, Political Prisoners in the U.S., India, and Israel. And it's going to feature organizers and activists and authors and editors connected to Shaka's book, Manifestations of Thought, which is coming out soon, The Trinity of Fundamentals, and How Long Can the Moon Be Caged? And you'll hear from Eugene Perrier as well as Shaka and other speakers. We'll probably have it recorded at some point, so it'll be available on our YouTube. And then the documentary is officially done, y'all. So it's
amazing.
New Shaka Shakur documentary titled Across Enemy Lines, Shaka A. Shakur, is going to be debuting likely in about 2 weeks. And then we're going to have the book launch for Manifestations of Thought in mid-November. So get excited, start telling your friends. It's going to inaugurate a new phase in the prison struggle, and we're going to get Shaka home before his next birthday.
That's right. Everything's coming up, Shaka. Love that.
Yeah. Well, that's it for this episode of Naptown People's Radio. If you found today's discussion useful, which I'm sure you did, pass it on, leave a comment, and listen for our next episode to drop. You can email us at producer@naptownpeoplesradio.com if you have an idea for the show. The road ahead is long, but we walk it together. Study with your comrades, build with your community, and always remember, theory without action is paralysis, but action without theory is chaos. Once again, I'm your host, Derek Ford, with my comrade co-host,
Dani Abdullah.
Stay dangerous, stay disciplined, and stay in the struggle.
We trying to create a movement. We got a chance to do something in Indiana that brothers like myself been talking about for the last 40 years. When I first became political and we was organized behind the walls in the 80s and 90s, some of the stuff that we doing now with the different programs and the different institutions that we have and things like the Indy Center is things that we used to talk about and dream about doing. And now we doing them. See what I'm saying? We doing it. And we got to keep that momentum going. And it's also generation. So as the next generation come up, you know what I'm saying? It's on y'all to take it to the next level and take it to the next stage.
Salute. Shakur.